Hello, my name is Donna Peace. I'm the curator here at the New Freedom Heritage Museum. And today we're going to be telling some stories about New Freedom in the 1800s. But before we do that, I just wanted to share a little bit about this table. This is a display that I've been working on for a while and finally got done. So when you come in here and sit at meetings or whatever, you can sit around and you'll be able to enjoy all these different pictures of New Freedom. So today I want to talk about family histories in New Freedom. And I want to share with you some of the binders that we do have already. And here's the first one. And this one talks about the Gemmels and the Hoax and the Bugs. So there's a little bit of information there on them. Here is the Free family, and we got quite a bit of information on them. And then we have somebody that interviewed Gordon Myers. And then we have two books, one on the Straley family, and this one is the Orwigs. And these two are more genealogy and less storytelling. The other ones are more storytelling. And the one I wanted to talk to you about today, the family of Bailey. And this was authored by Claudia and also her sister Margaret. And this family came to America from Ireland in 1732 and gradually made their way here to New Freedom. Some of them went other places, but a lot of the Baileys came to New Freedom. And today I mostly want to talk about Israel Bailey. He was born in 1833 and he married Rebecca, and they had 3 sons and 5 daughters. And the first thing Israel did when he got to this area was he operated a flour mill, which was basically where Susquehannock High School now stands. And then in 1880, he and his family moved to New Freedom, and they bought the homemade ice cream business from the Free family. And they had it for 38 years, and then they sold it to Norman Bostic and later to Clay Hughes, and eventually it was destroyed by fire in 1958. Most of the time, these last few families just ran the restaurant and not the ice cream business. There was a lady named Blanche Gosnell, and you'll hear that name too when you talk about the Baileys, because Blanche was a Gosnell and she married Robert Bailey, who was Israel's son. And she learned the art of dressmaking in Glen Rock, and soon after she learned that, the first dress sewing factory opened in New Freedom, and she came to work in New Freedom. And she found room and board with Mrs. Bailey, who was then a widow, and her bachelor son lived at home with her, and that was Robert. And they fell in love, and they were married at the ages of 30 and 27. Now, on October 9th, 1906, Blanche Gosnell and Robert Bailey of New Freedom were united in marriage. And because she was a designer and a sewer, she made her own wedding dress. And that is what you're looking at right now, the beautiful dress that she made in 1906. Most of the guests that traveled to the wedding came on horse and carriage. And it rained so hard while they were en route, that they all came and they were soaking wet. And remember, this is in 1906, and I think it's pretty cool that the bride and groom went on a wedding trip to Niagara Falls, New York. And after that, they set up housekeeping in New Freedom. And what I'd like to do today is tell you about making ice cream in the 1800s, because that's what this family did. As I've said, they came in 1880 to New Freedom, and they bought a house, and that house is still standing. It's at 18 East Main Street in New Freedom, and it came also with a restaurant and an ice house, plus a bunch of farmland that went from the railroad tracks up to the Catholic Church and up through the cemetery then. So it came with a lot of land. Now, they bought all this from the Free family, and Dr. Free lived in the brick house at 29 East Main Street, which was about 1 block from the Bailey house, across the street and up. And the ice cream business and the ice house and everything was where the Freedom Green is now, on the south side of it, about where the Christmas tree stands now. That's where this big operation was going on. Now, behind Dr. Free's house was a big old barn, and that's where the Baileys kept their cows and their horses. Their cows so that they could get the cream and the milk to make the ice cream, and then the horses to pull around all these wagons. Now, Israel was actually a pioneer in the wholesale ice cream business. It was hand paddled, and the only equipment in those days that you needed was a high wooden tub, a steel can, and a long round wooden stick with a flattened end. Now, it's necessary to have cracked ice with coarse salt sprinkled over it to produce a brine, because it gets much colder than just ice. And what they did is they mixed 2/3 pure cream and 1/3 milk, sugar, and pure vanilla, which is what they made that from real vanilla beans. And all that was measured and put into the steel can, and then the cover was put on really tight because you wouldn't want the brine to get in. Once they were ready to start paddling, then they took the cover off, of course. Now, this is what Israel did. He would start paddling. He would stick that big stick in that mixture of cream and stuff, and he'd walk in a circle around and around the can, and stirring the cream at the same time and holding that paddle with both hands. And it took a certain skill to be able to beat up a bunch of air in that cream mixture, so it turned into ice cream. And each of those containers, it took about 1 hour. And by the end of it, the volume had doubled. And he made vanilla, chocolate, and strawberries. Now, as the family members grew, the business grew, because then the kids could help too. And so the boys would take a wagon with a horse in front of it and pull the wagon through the countryside collecting cream so they could make their ice cream. And one of their biggest business ventures was to the Sunday schools and to the churches, because the Sunday schools had a lot of picnics. And that, a lot of times, was the only time that everybody ate ice cream in the 1800s. So 2 men would get in a wagon, which was pulled by 2 horses, and deliver these big old tubs of ice cream to all these towns in the area and going south into Maryland. And the picnics would begin about 10 in the morning, and they'd go till dusk. and the Bailey family stayed all day and dished out this ice cream. When the day was over, the church paid for only what they ate, and then they would have to haul back any leftovers back home, and they would re-ice it and serve it in their restaurant the next day. And at that time, picnics were held on any given day of the week, not just Sundays. So they were always busy with these picnics. And all year round, Bailey's ice cream was sent by train to stores and towns along the railroad in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Somebody would pull the ice tubs to the depot on a large homemade wooden express wagon. And in the winter, they would put these tubs on big sleds that were pulled by a rope and one person. I have a newspaper article here. Well, it's basically advertisements, but this is from the 1800s. I wanted you to see that because that talks about the Bailey's ice cream. It says, Israel Bailey and Sons, New Freedom, PA, celebrated ice cream, wholesale and retail, special prices to churches and picnics. An ice cream very superior and justly popular, long in great demand. Your orders will be greatly appreciated. So I thought that was fun to see a newspaper article advertisement from the time they were making their ice cream in the 1800s. Now, they made ice cream that way by walking around it, but then later in the 1900s, they actually bought an ice cream freezer that had a paddle in it. And that paddle was powered by a horse on a treadmill. And then they used that for a few years. And then the next improvement was a freezer powered by a steam engine. And then later, more improvement, a gasoline engine. And this business, ice cream business, went on for 38 years until 1918. Now, in order to obtain ice for freezing the ice cream, the Bailey family built a pond on the very source of the south branch of the Codorus Creek, which flowed from springs near Summit Grove. And then it would come under Main Street, through their yard, and on and on. And they made a pond just a block away from where they made their ice cream. So nowadays you would see it as the old insulator lot. And then that's where they would cut a lot of their ice blocks out of. And then those ice blocks would be carried by horse-drawn wagons to the ice house. The main ice cutting activity took place on Smith's Mill Dam and also at Keeney Mill Dam. And then they would hire farmers nearby to bring large wooden farm wagons with high sideboards to haul the blocks of ice to the Bailey Ice House. It usually required 4 horses to pull each wagon load. The men handling ice blocks, they had to wear these thick homemade mittens, not gloves, mittens. It had cuffs up to the elbows. And these mittens had several blanket linings, and then they covered it all over with corduroy. And then they would have a crew that would get out on these ponds and cut the ice with saws. And as soon as they would get a block of ice cut off, and then someone would retrieve it with a hook and slide it to shore, and then they were loaded onto wagons in layers. And then there was always a continuous line of wagons going back and forth from the pond to the ice house. Okay, now when the ice arrived at the ice house, then the men had to move the blocks with strong iron tongs into position, layer by layer. And between each layer of ice, they had to spread a layer of wood sawdust as insulation and to slow down melting. Now the ice houses were very tall, and so they rigged up a way of getting these blocks into the ice house by means of a rope and pulley, which were attached near the roof. Now, it was always necessary to have a large amount of ice in storage to use until the next ice season, so they could maintain their manufacturing process and to re-ice the tubs of ice cream every 12 hours. Now, at the beginning in 1880, when they started making ice cream, they only made 200 gallons of ice cream a year. And at the end of their 38 years in business, they were making 10,000 gallons and using 500 tons of ice. So now you know what it was like to make ice cream in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. I bet you never knew what it was when you eat your ice cream, how difficult and what hard work it was to make that ice cream cone back in the 1800s. Okay, well, thank you for listening. Goodbye.